All right, start thinking about what questions you might have. And let's open it up. If you run out of questions, we'll go back to the panel. So let's make it free flowing. So I think it's time. We're in a hot room with no windows, so I want to keep your attention.
There's another element of this we're talking about within the car, but there's a whole infrastructure outside. So can you talk about what we're going to expect or what we're going to need in infrastructure, say smart cities or that edge support to be able to enable, especially the communication technologies here, and how fast is that going to happen? Is that going to be the gate?
And can you just tell us where you're from?
Tom Coughlin, Coughlin Associates.
Thank you.
I would go back to the statement: more is better, right? In terms of the infrastructure, we started by talking about how sort of independent the car has to be. So clearly, an autonomous car has to be able to work without any infrastructure in place, other than a road to drive on, or something reasonably like a road to drive on. But more is better. The more infrastructure we have, some of these scenarios we talk about with, enabling the car to see beyond its line of sight and things like that happen when you start to create mesh networks of cars or networks enabled through infrastructure. So I think the challenge that we'll see is different metropolitan areas will advance their infrastructure at different rates, and some cities will be much more committed to accelerating their infrastructure than others, and so it's going to be very inconsistent for a very long time, if not forever, and it's just more is better.
I think to build on that, it gets better with infrastructure. So we're working with a company that's looking at traffic light data, and basically an electric car, if it knows the traffic light data and knows it's going down the street, it'll actually adjust its speed to make sure it always hits green lights in real time, because it's getting real-time traffic data, and essentially friendly to the environment. It's better, range for the car. It gets better. Without it, it can still drive, but it's better if it gets that infrastructure.
Well, I'd like to dig one level deeper than these gentlemen, in the sense that what infrastructure would you build, right? So today in the US, most of you are probably familiar with DSRC, the NPRM which was passed. So car-to-car over 802.11p. So the problem with DSRC is that who's going to build the infrastructure for that? And then up comes this doing car-to-car using LTE, right? So that is a big thing. There is a ruling out there that many of the mayors of these smart cities they're talking about are actually deploying these RSUs, the roadside units, for DSRC. But the problem is there are limitations of DSRC in terms of range. Range is about, a good day, 300 meters, while LTE can give you much longer range, so you can do much more of the E-Horizon stuff which he was talking about. So what infrastructure to build? That is a big conundrum for many of these mayors. Even though some of them are jumping in without thinking and building these RSUs, it's very expensive to build this infrastructure.
Steve?
I think that cars collect a tremendous amount of data, and it's not always, we've always talked about, you're not going to have full connectivity. Take a company like Uber, when their drivers park at night, there's a lot of data on those cars the Uber wants to download in terms of, things they took, directions they took, et cetera, et cetera. I actually think we're going to start seeing, with all due respect to centralized clouds, I think we're going to start to see more distributed cloud. There's 40,000 cell towers in the U.S., and they have a tremendous amount of power. They all have the bandwidth. You can put, and they all have extra energy. You can put compute in there, and you can actually do a lot of that distributed computation there, and then eventually get back to a centralized infrastructure. But I think you're going to start seeing more and more of leveraging what we have, but building a more distributed, highly computational, and with large data storage capability further and further out to the edge. And somebody mentioned your car is a data center. It will be. It just depends on how much energy you have and how much computation. But when they're collecting data, they have graph analytic problems that they've got to solve in real time. So their capabilities are going to go up quite a bit.
Okay, so first question, excellent question. Question in the back here, and then Mike down the front for the next question.
Yeah, so quick question. So this would be a lot easier if we could get rid of a couple 100 million poorly behaving cars with people behind the wheel, right? So how do we solve that? Do we end up with little communities where you can only have a self-driving car for a while, or what's the solution there?
I think that's a great question that, time will tell what will happen, but we have the same problem today where you have, 30, 40, 50-year-old cars on the road with modern cars, right? You have cars with automatic braking where I could be not paying attention and still not get in an accident. Another car that doesn't even have an airbag in it. And so I think this is a problem that will perpetuate itself for a long time. Last year I was speaking at a conference in Southern California around mobility and transportation. And that was one of the questions that came up is, do you segregate autonomous traffic from other traffic for safety reasons, for efficiency reasons, for congestion resolution? Do you segregate autonomous commercial traffic from the other traffic? And I think largely the answer is we don't know yet. We'll see what will happen there. I suspect in a lot of, especially pretty urban environments, that we'll see the segregation of some autonomous traffic from others, especially when we think about commercial trucking and things like that, where you can start to do high density, high speed traffic through an urban area.
Yeah, if you think about London and their congestion zone, it's a natural leap to say, well, you're already paying to come in here, so if you're an autonomous vehicle, you don't pay anything. Or you pay a lot
Or you
less,
could have an autonomous zone. Like only autonomous cars are allowed in this area, and they're designed in a way that makes it easier for autonomous cars to navigate.
I think Mike's actually looking for the utopian environment where he's the only one with the car and everybody else has to walk.
Yeah. My guess is insurance premiums are going to take care of the problem pretty quickly. It'll become too expensive for humans to drive themselves after a while. Next question. I think down the front here first. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. And Trevor Kerwin with Editor-in-Chief for ReadWrite. One of the themes that we get, because we talk about IoT all the time, and obviously autonomous vehicles all the time, as kind of right now I just kind of put that as the sexiest appliance that's going to use that in the next 10 to 15 years. You touched on distributed compute and also distributed connectivity issues. There's also an energy issue too. I always think of this as there's three utilities that any kind of large deployed network is going to use. So if you do a large network of autonomous vehicles, what really are, when you talk about like how various smart cities are coming together to try and figure out what their infrastructure is, are they thinking of all three of those things? Because those are very centralized networks still, even with cell towers or large scale data centers. I mean, I see some like Vapor.io doing tie-ups with one of the tower companies to have distributed data centers effectively at each tower. How fast does that need to get to the sort of roadbed level, or does it ever need to get to the roadbed level?
You should have had an operator on the panel to answer a question like that.
Yep.
But there's also a pricing issue also that, if, for example, for 5G, if you get to these millimeter wave cell towers, then the operators have to price it appropriately so that it's lucrative for the OEM to actually use that particular service, right? Otherwise, they'll always, in a fleet situation, they'll always go back to their garage, and that's when they'll offload the stuff. They'll only use it, as I mentioned, only for. I'm sorry.
So it's effectively still a return to base fleet you're seeing in the world of the future.
Well, I think it really depends on the latency of the answer you're looking for. Okay, if things are really pretty, that's why Wall Street co-locates their data centers right next to them, because those microseconds, those fractions of a second are billions of dollars. So, if you can afford taking time, letting things happen, parking overnight, you can send something across the. But I think if there's more and more things that have to happen in a fairly, quick, real-time manner, it's going to have to be closer. And so I think that you're going to see what Vapor.io is doing as an example. They're taking advantage of an infrastructure that's there today, but I think they'll take advantage of any infrastructure that gives them the connectivity to be able to go back into the cloud but become more highly decentralized. Number one, it's more reliable. Right. You don't have to take out one thing, you've got to take out millions of things, and the latencies are much lower.
What's Vapor.io for the sake of everybody else?
I don't want to misinterpret. Sorry, if there's anybody here from Vapor.io, my apologies. But they basically have small distributed data centers, and their plan, they tied up with, I think, Crown. I don't want to get that wrong, but one of the tower asset managers to put compute there. Totem is another company that's doing the same thing, but more on corporate campuses to put connectivity, compute, and energy storage in some kind of roadway furniture, right? So that's
when we think about, like from a Microsoft perspective, when we think about distributed cloud, what we're really thinking about is we have 38 regions worldwide where we have big data centers, and there's multiple data centers per region. So from a global scale standpoint, we're there, but there's this edge concept where edge can have multiple meanings. So the idea that we could be talking about the edge of the cloud, where we can take something like what we call Azure Stack, which is basically take our pattern for a data center and put it somewhere. So this concept of a digital garage for a fleet, or these sort of remote data centers where they become important for some commercial business operation to happen, is an edge of the cloud, and then we talk about the intelligent edge in the car itself. So I think what we'll see as time moves on, especially where these AI workloads happen and these high density data workloads happen, is that we have our global distributed cloud for centralization, and then we have these sort of remote digital garage assets.
Yeah, this binary idea of cloud versus edge, just a break.
There's a middle
multiple
ground,
levels.
yeah.
Sure, I can actually envision a time when, you know, your car's parked in your garage. It's electric, so it's plugged into the wall. And it's got and you can leverage the computation to be able to do some work, some distributed work as part of a larger collective. So say some, you know, hyperscale decides they're going to rent that and use that as part of their overall, you know, their services.
I can use my car to make Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can use your card. Yes.
And maybe you'll get one. You got to keep up with
keep going.
keep up with those
Gentleman in the
500 megawatt data centers
Yeah.
in China.
Yeah.
Paul from Roadway Media. You've been talking a lot about this connection to infrastructure and standardized hardware with 4G, 5G, and everything else. But you're talking about smart cities with purchasing that has requirements for buy local. So as you cross the US from here to New York, you're going to go through 10, 15,000 different smart city software installations that are going through, that are regionalized, different capabilities and everything else. How do you see this local compute and AI issue being able to deal with the fact that in the 50-person town outside of Des Moines, it doesn't have the same smart city infrastructure as in San Jose?
Expressions on the faces say, wow, that's a good question.
No, I'm actually, what I really want to say, and hopefully it's not flippant, you ought to go read Joe Maitola's doctoral thesis on software-defined radio.
I bring this up because we've been covering this connected car space for about 5 years. And this was a major topic of discussion at the last 3 connected car shows about the software incompatibilities and the security aspects that you could make really secure endpoints in the cars as a platform, but the people are going to go in through the cities because they don't have the money to put that sort of defenses in on their smart city infrastructure. So if you're going to spoof what lights are doing, whether there's vehicles in the space, what the timing is, rather than try to hack vehicles, you hack the city infrastructure that's managing that network, and you send bad data to the vehicles. And that's what they're targeting for recent ransomware attacks, is because now there is a universal payer because there's multiple targets. And this is a challenge for the AI-based systems because there's an assumption of learning that goes into place. So when you now can't qualify the data they're using, it becomes a challenge in being able to get this level of trust you were talking about.
But I contend if you're careful, you can. Okay, there's no reason why any piece of data that comes through doesn't go through an authentication challenge. Mm-hmm. Somebody wants to send me data, I will challenge them on their authenticity, and we'll do that exchange. And if it's not somebody I trust, maybe I don't want to let that data in.
Nor the data.
No, I also think you don't blindly trust the infrastructure. If saying the light's green and the camera and other sensors can clearly see it's red, the car's not going to go forward. So I think there's some double checking and triple checking that happens too.
And I wasn't being flippant, and maybe you've already read it, but Joe Maitola's thesis is excellent in terms of it, but he's looking at it from a frequency perspective.
Right.
If I'm walking into an environment, what frequency do I have? And if I was using the emergency signal over here, but it's being used here, I can't use that. Where can I go to get other services?
So, no, but I think your point is that the endpoint is compromised, right? Because the transport is, for example, Wave does a fantastic job in making sure that you look at authenticated packets only. So you know that whoever is sending you has a valid certificate on the other side. So we know that, but if the endpoint itself is compromised, then you're screwed.
If you're the infrastructure and you're looking at a compromised endpoint?
Yeah.
Why can't you use the same authentication scheme in order to say,
No, but he's saying
trust
the person
It
who holds
costs
the
money.
certificate is a bad actor.
Yeah. It costs a lot of money to do that authentication and maintain it on a regular basis. And a lot of cities don't have that money, and they're going to be forced to go into a smart connected marketplace before they're financially ready to support that in their data center.
I think it keeps coming back to Tim's opening point, which autonomous requires autonomy.
So this sounds like one to resolve
Yeah.
in the 4 o'clock
Offline
when the drinking you
And
have.
while we're doing it,
Yeah,
I have a
maybe 2
question
days.
for you. You've been looking at it for 3 years. What do you suggest?
The first thing is if they're going to put in smart cities and they're going to have this standardization for hardware interfaces, they have to get rid of this 60-year-old rule of everybody can buy from lowest bidder. You have to have some sort of standardization for going through, just like you are with the wireless protocols and the other things. Not just one vendor. You can have multiple vendors, but they have to be using compatible systems at a minimum level, and currently there is no threshold for minimal acceptable. And that's one of the things that needs to be put in place. Otherwise, you can't put this guarantee of trust. You have to define it has to be at least this, or you can't offer it.
But you're
That's
aware of the Omnier certification, which tends to standardize this device-to-device transport in cars, right? So everybody has to go through the certification process.
Right, but there's a lot of cities that aren't participating
If you
in
bypass
that.
the certification process,
Yeah.
All right, so let's do this one. Let's wrap it up after the discussion's done. So any other questions here in the audience? Put your hand up and Mark will run a mic to you. There you go. Nice haircut, by the way.
I was about to say the same to you.
I was actually thinking about doing that too.
Took me hours. So you guys are obviously we're here as guests of a technology company, and you're all working with technology companies. And I've heard a lot of this kind of discussion where clearly this is a huge technical problem, and it's fascinating and it's exciting. What I'm not 100% convinced by yet, because frankly technology companies don't have the greatest track record, is when it comes to the market. And let me just give you one example. You know, clearly there's 70, 80 million cars sold a year. You can argue how much silicon content, it's going to go up, it's going up, we know that. But there are other forces at work here which I wonder whether technology companies actually think about, where if you think about the end goal where you make vehicles capable of finding their own way around the world, then there are people who are arguing, well, you're basically reducing them to a utility, to you're basically redefining public transport and removing private transport. And in that kind of a world, you know, these things are commoditized, and you have a market that is 80 million units or maybe even less. And the cost of the technology comes down rapidly because it has every reason to do so. Right now, cars are an object of desire, right? They're sold up to people by adding technology to them, and so all of this is fantastic in the short term, but I've read and I've seen some interesting numbers that say that long term, maybe we're putting ourselves out of business a bit here. Any thoughts on that?
I think it depends on what you mean by long term, of course, but you know, I think over the next 15, 20 years or so, we're going to see autonomous vehicles being kind of led by shared autonomous vehicles. So there's still going to be a huge density of personally owned vehicles. I think personally owned autonomous vehicles, will be later. It'll be companies like Uber and companies like BMW who have their Reach Now shared ride service and things like that, where they will invest in autonomy to make those things more business efficient for them. I don't foresee, at least for a very long time, that we will see this total commoditization of cars to a simple utility, because I think there's still an aspect of people like to drive. People drive for enjoyment, not just for utility. People drive, especially in the United States, driving has become part of our sort of the panorama of our country, so to speak. You take road trips and you go on vacations and you do these things. And so I think it's a significantly long time before we see transportation just totally turn into a utility. But I do see this transformation occurring. And what we will see is this transformation to where we talk about mobility as a service, where it's really about mobility. And part of my mobility story is the car that I own or the car that I share with someone and how I use that car. But like in my house, we're a 2-car family, and we're probably going to be a 4-car family in the near future. And if we were to fast forward ourselves a little while, maybe we would be a 1-car family because my car could take me to work and then return home and help my family with their day before coming back to get me at work. But I think that's a very long time away.
So I'll jump in as the futurist rather than the panel moderator. I think marketing people will be able to earn their keep in the automotive sector for decades to come,
Yes.
even with autonomy. And you can imagine all kinds of different models where instead of buying a BMW anymore, you join the BMW club. So when you want a car, a nice car comes to pick you up versus something lesser. So I don't think you're going to see a homogenization of the transportation sector. There will always be opportunities to sell up in whatever you do. It's just a different level of service. So you might join Uber Silver or you might join Uber Platinum.
I think you're
And
saying
a
human
different-
ego will always play a role in this?
You can always sell higher end services to people who have more money to spend.
Yes.
So I don't think it's going to compress like a pancake at all.
But I do think cars, as we know them today, will be definitely different.
Oh, completely.
Today's car is made for, 5% per use? Most of the time it's parked. When we get into this autonomy where it can be used, like you said, pick up, drop off kids, run errands, you're now talking about 50% or higher usage.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole design of the car is going to change.
For sure.
From AutoG China. As we know, Audi just announced that they will be responsible for all the accidents caused by their autonomous driving technology. And Volvo said the same thing previously. So it seems that all the car makers are very optimistic and confident about this technology. It's good for the consumer, but apparently not that good for the suppliers. Because last year, as we know, Tesla and Mobileye were fighting fiercely about the responsibility of the accident happened in the May when Joshua died when he in the autonomous driving. So based on these scenarios, the car makers are so confident about the technology. And how about the suppliers? Are we also very confident, and why?
So as risk shifts down the chain back towards the OEMs and ultimately to you guys, how do you deal with that?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility for the safety on this car is the OEM, right? It's not the supplier, right? We need to play our part for sure. We have to have 0 defects or less. Think about that. And we have to continue to improve quality, continue to improve reliability, and continue to work closely with the tier ones, the SoC providers, the rest of the partners to make sure that whatever help, whatever solutions, whatever design in is required to deliver that level of confidence that they're willing to sign up for, that we're enabling that essentially, right, and supporting that. But
I agree with it. So we provide as much, as I mentioned, redundancy, multiple operators, as far as connectivity, I'm only talking about connectivity. We provide as much redundancy, ASIL level, and all that stuff, but we are not responsible in the end. It's the OEM which is responsible, but we provide the impetus.
I'm going to give a more detailed non-answer. What it does is it makes for very complicated legal contracts. You have the OEM, you have their tier 1 manufacturer, you have multiple silicon suppliers, and you have the software supplier. Yeah. And there's typically a multi-way contract between all of these entities on how to handle liability. And it's very complicated, and it's different for every engagement.
I think that the move that Audi and others have announced is great. I think it does speak to the confidence that ultimately they have in their solutions. I think it also speaks to the adoption hurdle that we're talking about, which is until and unless they're willing to do that, they may not be able to sell that car. Right? So
Well,
it's
I
sort of
think
required
I think it's
also. Right?
But I think it's just like any other warranty. If they're confident in the technology and they're confident if you use it like this, and this under these conditions, then we guarantee this thing should work, and if it doesn't, we're responsible. And That's what I'm hearing
The
here.
buck stops.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I guess
But
that there's
it's proving that you used it under all the conditions that we said, and that's where the legal horizon is
And ultimately,
gonna
they
be.
have no choice. They have to be the one to
Yeah.
tell their customer,
This is safe.
you know, we're liable for that.
And I guess
Yeah,
there's,
that's great
there's the
marketing.
next layer on top of that, which is where
Turn on
Mercedes
your
has
own
gone,
road.
which is to say, not only do we think our vehicles are safe, but if it comes down to it, if we have to choose between mounting the curb and taking out little old lady, driving into the tree and killing you and your other passenger, the little old lady gets it. Because they've said, we will prioritize the people inside the cabin because you're our customer, which is a whole nother discussion that goes beyond, is a vehicle just
They
safe?
actually have a commercial like that?
No commercial, but
It's just a
I would love to.
That's in the fine print, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
All right, so so is that last question or? 5 more minutes, okay. So question over here.
And I'm asking on behalf of this beautiful lady who sits next to me. So she has 2 questions. And the first one is, we've been talking a lot about autonomous driving, like other possibilities and opportunities. She wants to know, like, can you quickly summarize the key challenges that autonomous driving has brought to you or your work? And question 2 is, any progress of your recent study or work that you can share with us?
So
The list is long.
So as far as our challenges, you know, when drivers, my daughter included, started driving, she had 16 years of learned experience growing up human. You're now trying to transfer that knowledge to a computer. And so, you know, say snow's covering the lanes, you can't see them, we line up into columns. You know, you have to teach the car how to do that. You have to teach the car, you know, I think you mentioned traffic cop directing traffic. They have, in the US at least, they have lots of dances and weird gestures they use, and half the time I've been yelled at, so I don't even know what they're trying to say. But the car has to figure that out. Detours, there's just so many things happening. A washing machine falls off the back of a truck, understanding that I need to go around that, whereas it's a Mylar balloon floating, that's okay, I can drive through that. Driving like a human, recognizing all the things that happen is hard. And that's, you know, one of the complex tasks that's happening.
I totally agree that the challenge is in the intelligence. Like we can teach cars to do simple things, follow lines on a road, stop when there's an object. It's the intelligence that a car has to have to be able to navigate the real world, especially in densely populated areas. And to the points that were made earlier, there's technology we haven't thought of or invented or created yet that will ultimately solve this problem. I don't know that we're totally there yet, but we're certainly on path. And I think we, you know, have learned a tremendous amount over the last few years. And the rate at which we're accelerating this is increasing because of the investment we're all making into this space, knowing that we all play, you know, we're pieces in this puzzle. But ultimately, making the car truly intelligent, as we were talking about earlier, I think is going to be the biggest hurdle to overcome.
For us, mainly coming from connectivity, I learned a lot about new use cases. I'm sorry, I have to be a little more technical, but new use cases as uplink bandwidth became, we weren't used to seeing a lot of uplink bandwidth. We see UDP bandwidth as opposed to most TCP bandwidth because we carry all the video on UDP. Like I said, going across multiple operators was an unusual thing. The first time we have done that. The entire data has to be secure. Credentials have to be established at the start of the car until it comes back. And then, like I mentioned, there is a certain amount of time these fleet cars go out and come back within 8 hours. They collect a lot of data inside. How do you unload this data very quickly? You don't go through cellular, you go through Wi-Fi. So you intelligently choose where to direct which interface to direct your traffic at. And authentication reverse also was a new thing for us. As somebody mentioned, eventually you'll probably want to do this for compute as well, because your car is just lying around in the garage, right? You want to use that. So, but before you do that, there's a lot of security you have to go through, authentication and stuff. So we had to do all that. So that was new for me.